So, today I am going to be talking about the theory of flight, which is the grade 12, 2024 Setwork book. But the thing is that my camera is dying, so I need to speed this up. I trust that you've read some of the book, so I'm going to speedrun this. So, our story takes place in Rhodesia. So it starts off with Bafana. I shall pronounce his last name because I cannot. So he discovers that he loves traveling when, after his education, he joins a merchant and they go around selling things. So as a result, he changes his name from Bafana to Baines Tekiti. Baines was a famous traveler and, well, explorer, and Tekiti is basically another name for, or another word for ticket. So he goes around, he's an excellent salesman. The women are all for whatever he has to say, and they buy his wares, and so this all runs smoothly until he meets Prudence. Now, Prudence is a lady who does not succumb to his charms, and as a result, he falls in love with her. He asks her to marry him. She says yes. So he plans out their life. He wants to buy a nice house, have a car with one of those roofs, the convertible car, and he wants to take his children traveling and alles. However, these plans are absolutely destroyed when Prudence gives birth to Livingstone Stanley Tekiti. Livingstone and Stanley are also famous explorers, hence the name. And it turns out that this little boy is albino. What that means is that now Baines cannot take him everywhere because he will burn. So as a result, Baines gets frustrated. He leaves to go and explore and all of that, but he feels bad, so he sends back money. But then Prudence sends back the money, and Baines gets so distraught that he walks into the ocean. Now, Prudence also has a daughter. Her name is Menenhle. So you have the brother and sister, Livingstone and Menenhle. However, Livingstone changes his name to Golide Gumede, which means fields of gold. Now, Golide Gumede also inherited his father's love for travel, except he is fascinated on air travel. He's fascinated with airplanes. Now, a war breaks out, right? So while Golide is away, he sees, oh wow, this is beautiful airplane coming through. So he decides he wants to shoot it down because he wants to analyze it and use it to teach people how to build airplanes. Unfortunately, instead of a graceful landing, it blows up. So, during that time, before the airplane blows up, Golide Gumede meets Elizabeth Nyoni. She is a country singer. She's self-styled after Dolly Parton, and she has all these big dreams. Now she falls in love with Golide Gumede. They do whatever, and they have a daughter. However, in this book, it is said that she is born of a golden egg. There's quite a bit of interesting bird imagery relating to this child of theirs who's going to later become the main character of the story. This child is Jeannie, or Imogen, and she is then raised on Beaufort Farm and Estate, which is where this main beginning of the book happens. Beaufort Farm and Estate. So Beaufort Farm and Estate was originally run by Bennington Beaufort. He was the he was the father of a girl named Beatrice. Now, Bennington died. It's implied that he was murdered. And as a result, Beatrice sort of inherited the farm. But she was she was a white woman, and she was very liberal. So she wanted the connections between black and white to be re-established, and she fought for them and everything. So she went to a wealthy school, and her best friend at the time, Kuki, Kuki had no opinions of her own, whereas Beatrice was very fiery about things. Now, remember that Golide Gumede has a sister, Menenhle, right? So, with Golide shooting down the airplane, it turns out that the person who was traveling inside this airplane was the owner of Beaufort Farm and Estate. So the government sort of like tries to find Golide. So what's the first thing that happens? They go after his sister, Menenhle. And they send in this man, Mordecai, to interrogate Menenhle, torture her, anything to find out the location of Golide. So, the only problem is that this guy, Mordecai, also known as, I cannot remember. So, Mordecai, he was an orphan. They call him a child born of fire because he's just angry at the world. However, when he interrogates Menenhle, he tortures her, but her character stays the same. She's like, I will not give up my brother, all of that. And so Mordecai sort of like falls for this woman because she has now given him a new sort of outlook on life. So Mordecai then spends years changing himself so he can come back and marry Menenhle. So Menenhle is a school teacher, and she has a student called Thandi Hadebe, and she's vain. She thinks that she's beautiful, and so she thinks that she's beautiful, and as a result, she goes off to New York. I'm actually not sure. She goes off to America. She comes back and has a son and then disappears again to America. Now this son, his name is Marcus, right? So, Marcus is best friends with Jeannie later on. This Jeannie girl is like the main central character. Jeannie and Marcus sort of drive the plot, but overall Jeannie is the main character. Now, Kuki met this guy, Emile. And Emile Kutsia was
24 hours later.
So, Emile Kutsia. Now, Emile Kutsia was an Afrikaans guy, and he needed an English wife in order to have a place in the whole political area of things. Because Emile Kutsia wanted to found the organization, which is basically a shortened version of the Organization of Domestic Affairs. Now, there, after Emile Kutsia, the man himself took over. And under the man himself is a guy called Valentine Tanaka. He is the chief registrar, and underneath him is Mordecai. And Mordecai is the one who then goes and tortures Menenhle and all of that. Okay, so I did Jeannie's sort of family, so now I have to do Marcus's family. Marcus's grandmother, her name is Eunice Masuku, and Eunice Masuku, her son is Dingani Masuku. Dingani Masuku then married Thandi Hadebe, and she became Thandi Masuku. Then she had two children, Thandi. She had Crystal and Marcus, Marcus being the oldest. Crystal was had after she went off to America, and Crystal's first introduction was when they came back and took Marcus from Beaufort Farm and Estate to go back to America or wherever. After Beaufort Farm and Estate gets burned and people die, then Jeannie gets adopted by Dingani and that family because Jeannie's parents died, because Dingani actually told his friends that Golide was planning to overthrow the government, and then Dingani's friends went and told the man himself. The man himself found out, found the location, and that's how the whole thing happened. So I do believe that I haven't yet covered Vida and how he fits into all of this. Now, Vida, he is introduced as someone living on the streets, but he does have a much deeper connection. So what happened is when Kuki and Emile Coetzee got married, they had a son, and this son was named Everly. And now Vida saw Everly perform on stage at a talent show, and then they both sort of awakened something in each other, and they became a bit more than friends. That whole dynamic was then later, a girl named Rosamund Pierce was also brought into the friend group, and they were very close friends until Everly had to go to war and he stepped on a landmine. As a result, Rosamund went off and disappeared, and Vida just sort of swore to himself that he would never ever move on from the death of his lover. As a result, Vida then resorted to living on the streets because he just couldn't get out of or get over Everly's death. Jeannie and Vida happened to bump into each other when Jeannie was hit by a car that Kuki was driving, because Kuki was watching Vida and she was just admiring Vida's bravery, so she wasn't paying attention to the road. Jeannie got hit by the car, spiraled out and into Vida's pushcart, and that's how they first met. And then later, after Jeannie got HIV and she was sort of rejected by the Masukus, on her 18th birthday she then goes back to the streets and just lives with Vida. The people on the street, we've got David, who is the educated street dweller, but he didn't have enough money to go to Harvard, so he's on the street. You have the survivors, which is a gang of street kids, and you have Goliath, who is their leader. Valentine Tanaka, remember he worked for the organization, right? So later, actually, when Jeannie goes into a coma as a result of her not wanting to take her medicine, the Masukus go to Valentine to try and find Jeannie. That's the connection with Valentine. The way Becky Temba is connected is that at the beginning, he just looked up to Gulidu Gumede, so he wanted to write newspapers about him and all of that. And he actually had to work under the man himself, because that's just where the Chronicle, that's the name of the newspaper, that's just the man himself controlled the newspaper. And then later, Becky Temba, when he finds out about Jeannie and Vida and all of that, he says, hang on, these are the kids, technically, of Gulidu Gumede, so he becomes interested in their story. So he's just sort of, this guy comes in and out the whole story. So there are a few other little characters, like Xander Dangerfield, who ends up being like Crystal's sort of love interest later on. You have Esme, who's Marcus's wife, because Marcus figured that he had to move on from Jeannie somehow. You have Mr. Mendelssohn, who's the undertaker, who sort of prepared Jeannie for her funeral. You have Matilda, who's the housekeeper at the house that Jack built, which is the place that Vida and Jeannie actually live. You have Stefanos, who is the gardener for the house that Jack built, again, the place that Vida and Jeannie stay. You have Dr. Mambo, who is Jeannie's doctor, and Dr. Mambo actually sort of, she's there from when Jeannie first got HIV until she finally is in ICU in the coma, busy dying. So Stranger Dr. Mambo is actually a pretty solid character, but they don't really look into her that much. And then finally you have Justina, who was Elizabeth Nyoni's friend back at Beaufort Farm and Estate. She does pop in again. She's mainly in the beginning of the book, and then she pops in later at the end of the book, when they say that Jeannie is dying or dead. And yeah, Justina is also the one that helped Jeannie escape when all the people were murdered in the village. So I hope I covered everything for the theory of like connections between the people. If there is anybody that I forgot, I will maybe make a part 2. I'm not sure. Either if I forgot anybody, they are characters that were not mentioned in the introduction, like the characters, which is on page 7. Either that, or yeah, they were just didn't impact the story that much. So yeah, I hope this worked.